Imagine standing in a quiet valley, somewhere in the Japanese countryside. There is no road nearby, no factory, no aircraft overhead, just rice fields, a river, and the hills. And then, without any warning at all, a sound like a cannon shot tears across the landscape. It rattles the windows of houses hundreds of meters away. There is no explosion. There is no source you can point to. Just a low, violent crack rolling out of the mouth of a railway tunnel, and then, a few minutes later, another one, and another, all day long. For the people who lived near Japan's high-speed railways in the 1990s, this was not a thought experiment. It was a daily assault on their nerves. And the strangest part was where it came from. It was being caused by the single most advanced, most celebrated machine the country had ever built, the bullet train. This is the story of how one bizarre, almost invisible problem nearly slammed a ceiling down on the fastest train on Earth, why the answer to it was hiding inside a bird, and how a 15-meter nose shaped like a beak quietly kept an entire nation at the front of the world. Because here is the part that should make you stop and think. The solution to one of the most advanced engineering problems of the 20th century had been flying over Japanese rivers for 50 million years. And for a long time, nobody thought to look up. There is a quiet lesson buried in this whole story, and it's worth keeping in your mind as we go. We tend to think of cutting-edge engineering as something humans invent from nothing, by sheer brain power and brute computing force. But every so often, the most sophisticated machine of its age turns out to work best when it stops trying to be clever and simply copies something that nature perfected long before we ever existed. The Shinkansen is the perfect example of that idea. So let's find out exactly how a bird saved the bullet train, because the journey there runs through a wall of compressed air, a national noise law, and one engineer with a very unusual hobby. To understand why a single design problem could matter this much, you first have to understand what the Shinkansen actually means to Japan. It is not just a train. When the first Shinkansen line opened in 1964, in time for the Tokyo Olympics, it didn't just connect two cities, it rewired a country. For the first time, the industrial heart of Japan could be crossed in hours instead of a full day, and the bullet train became the steel spine running down the length of the nation, carrying hundreds of millions of passengers a year, linking the great manufacturing centers, and turning distant cities into something close to suburbs of one another. It was fast, it was famously punctual, and it became a symbol of the entire post-war Japanese miracle. When the world pictured the future of transport, it pictured a white train streaking past Mount Fuji. But there was a problem hardwired into the geography of the whole thing, and it would only get worse the faster the trains went. Japan is not a flat country. It is a chain of crumpled mountainous islands, and to drive a dead straight high-speed railway across terrain like that, you cannot go around the mountains. You have to go through them. The Shinkansen network is, to an extraordinary degree, a network of tunnels. Mile after mile of the route runs underground, bored straight through solid rock. And for the first few decades, at the speeds the early trains ran, that was perfectly fine. And then the engineers did what engineers always do. They tried to go faster. And the moment they pushed the speed up, the mountains pushed back in a way nobody had really seen coming. Here is the physics of what was happening, and it is genuinely one of the strangest problems in railway history. So stay with me, because once you understand it, you'll see exactly why a bird's beak was the answer. When a train travels through open air, the air simply flows around it and slips away to the sides. There is plenty of room, but when that same train, traveling at close to 300 kilometers an hour, suddenly punches into the narrow mouth of a tunnel, the air in front of it has nowhere to go. The walls trap it. The train acts like a giant piston, slamming into a sealed cylinder, and it compresses a colossal column of air ahead of itself, all at once. That compression doesn't just sit there. It races forward down the tunnel as a pressure wave, traveling at the speed of sound far faster than the train itself. It rushes through the darkness toward the far end of the tunnel, and when it bursts out of the opening at the other side, it releases all of that pent-up energy in a single, sharp, explosive crack of sound. The Japanese engineers had a name for it, the tunnel boom, or more technically, the micro-pressure wave. To the families living near the tunnel exits, it was simply a deafening bang, going off again and again, day after day, with no end in sight. And this is where the problem turned from an annoyance into a genuine wall, because Japan has some of the strictest noise pollution standards in the entire world. In residential areas, the regulations set a hard limit of 70 decibels. That is not a suggestion, it is the law. And every time a faster train fired a sonic boom out of a tunnel into a sleeping neighborhood, it shattered that limit, and the complaints poured in. The railway could not simply ignore its own country's laws. So the engineers were trapped between two immovable forces. On one side, the relentless drive to run the trains faster, to stay ahead of a world that was racing into high-speed rail. On the other, a strict legal ceiling on noise that the trains were already smashing through. And now we come to the detail that almost nobody outside Japan understands about this story, and it completely flips how you think about it. We assume the great challenge of a bullet train is making it go fast, but listen to how the man at the center of this would later describe it. The challenge, he said, was no longer how to make the train run faster. Modern technology could handle that. The real, far harder challenge was how to make it run quietly. Read that again, because it's the whole pivot of the story. By the 1990s, speed was the easy part. Silence was the impossible part. And the loudest, most stubborn source of all that noise was the boom screaming out of the tunnels. For years, the conventional approaches simply weren't enough. You can smooth a train's shape, you can soften an edge here and there, but the fundamental problem was brutal and physical. It was the abruptness of it, the way the train hit the wall of trapped air so suddenly that there was no time for the pressure to bleed away gently. The harder they pushed for speed, the harder that wall of air slammed back. The engineers needed something completely different. They needed a shape that could move from open air into dense, resisting trapped air without that violent shock. And there was nothing in the standard playbook of railway design that could do it. The breakthrough, when it finally came, did not come from a wind tunnel or a textbook. It came from a man with a pair of binoculars. His name was Eiji Nakatsu, and he was the general manager of the technical development department for JR West, the company building the next generation of bullet train. By every measure, he was a serious senior engineer. But Nakatsu had a second life, a passion that had nothing to do with trains at all. He was a devoted, lifelong bird watcher, an active member of the Wild Bird Society of Japan, and it was that hobby, not his engineering degree, that was about to solve a problem a whole industry had been stuck on. The first clue came from one of his younger engineers, who made a strange, almost poetic observation. He said that when the test train rushed into a tunnel, it felt as if the train had suddenly shrunk. Most people would have nodded and moved on. Nakatsu didn't. He turned the comment over in his mind and realized the engineer was describing exactly the physical event at the heart of the problem. The train was experiencing a sudden, violent change in air resistance, slamming from the open sky into the closed, dense environment of the tunnel in a fraction of a second. And so Nakatsu asked himself a question that no aerodynamics manual would ever have prompted. Is there anything in the natural world, he wondered, that has solved the problem of moving suddenly from one medium into another, much denser one, without creating a shock? And from somewhere in all those years of watching birds, the answer surfaced. The kingfisher, if you have ever seen one hunt, you will understand instantly why it's stuck in his mind. A kingfisher sits perched above a river, absolutely still, and then it drops. It plunges from the open air straight down into the water, a substance roughly 800 times denser than the air it just left. And it does this at high speed to catch a fish that would bolt at the slightest disturbance. And here is the miracle. It barely makes a splash. There is no violent impact, no great spray of water to warn its prey. It slips from one world into another almost silently. The bird had solved, with total elegance, the exact problem that was tormenting the fastest train on Earth. The sudden transition from a light medium to a dense one without a shockwave, Nakatsu looked at that beak. Long, narrow, smoothly tapered, perfectly streamlined, and he realized he was looking at the answer to the tunnel boom. The The shape that let a bird knife into water without a splash was the same shape that would let a train knife into a tunnel without a bang. Now, this is the moment where a good story could become a fairy tale, where we simply say the engineer copied a bird and everyone lived happily ever after. But the truth of what happened next is far more impressive than that, and it gives us the real climax of this entire story, because Nakatsu and his team did not just take it on faith, they went to work and tested it hard. They ran experiments firing projectiles of many different shapes into a pipe, measuring the pressure waves each one produced, hunting for the shape that created the smallest, gentlest wave. They ran exhaustive simulations of trains running through tunnels on a state-of-the-art supercomputer, the kind of machine used for space research, crunching the aerodynamics at a level of detail no bird could ever know it possessed. And here is what they found. The shape that the supercomputer identified as the ideal, the optimum form for slipping into a tunnel with the least possible pressure wave was almost identical to the beak of a kingfisher. Sit with that for a second, because it is genuinely extraordinary. One of the most advanced computing systems on the planet, fed with the full physics of high-speed aerodynamics, arrived at the same answer that evolution had carved into a small river bird over the course of 50 million years. The bird had been right all along, the supercomputer simply confirmed it. As Nakatsu himself put it, he was learning once again what it means to learn from nature. So, they built it. The new train, the 500 Series Shinkansen, was given a nose unlike anything the world had seen on a train before. A long, smooth, almost perfectly round cone, stretching an astonishing 15 meters from tip to cab, the largest, strangest, most beautiful beak ever bolted onto a machine. And when it was finally let loose, the results were not just good, they were transformative on every single front at once. First, and most importantly, it worked. The tunnel boom was tamed, brought down within that strict 70 decibel legal limit, finally silencing the cannon fire that had haunted the neighborhoods near the tunnels. But that was only the beginning. That same elegant shape sliced through the open air so cleanly that it cut the train's air resistance by around 30%. Less resistance meant less effort, and the train's electricity consumption dropped by roughly 15%. And with all that drag stripped away, the train could now run about 10% faster for free, reaching 300 kilometers an hour in regular service, all while using less power and making less noise than the train it replaced. Quieter, faster, and more efficient, all from one idea borrowed from a bird. There are not many moments in engineering where solving one problem hands you 3 more victories you weren't even asking for. This was one of them. And if you find stories like this fascinating, the moments where the answer to an impossible problem turns out to be hiding in plain sight in the natural world, then leave a comment and subscribe, because the history of these machines is full of them, and some are even stranger than a train with the nose of a bird. Because here's the thing, the kingfisher was not the only animal that ended up in the design of that train. Once Nakatsu had seen what nature could teach him, he started looking everywhere. And the next problem he tackled took him from the river to the night sky. The boom from the tunnels was gone, but there was still another major source of noise, and it was coming from the top of the train. Running along the roof of every Shinkansen is the pantograph, the angular arm that reaches up to draw electricity from the wires overhead. At high speed, the air rushing past that pantograph tears into chaotic whistling turbulence, and it howled. So Nakatsu asked his question again. What in nature moves through the air in total silence? And again, the answer was a bird, the owl. An owl can swoop down on a mouse in absolute silence because the leading edges of its wing feathers are not smooth. They are lined with tiny serrations, a comb-like fringe that breaks up the air into countless small, quiet eddies instead of one big, noisy one. Nakatsu's team studied that exact mechanism and added serrations to the pantograph, breaking up the turbulence the same way an owl's feathers do, and dragging the whistle down to a murmur. And then there was the pantograph's supporting shaft itself, the part that held the whole assembly up into the wind. To reduce the drag and noise of that, the team looked to yet another animal famous for moving smoothly through a dense fluid. The Adelie penguin, whose sleek, streamlined body lets it glide through water with almost no resistance. They shaped the support to mirror that smooth, efficient form. A kingfisher in the nose, an owl in the pantograph, a penguin holding it all up. The 500 Series Shinkansen was not so much designed as it was assembled from the best ideas in the animal kingdom. So now we can return to the biggest claim of all, the one in the title, and ask whether it really holds up. Did a bird's beak truly save Japan? And the honest answer is that it depends on how seriously you take what was at stake. The Shinkansen is the circulatory system of the Japanese economy, and Japan is a country where almost any expansion of that system means more tunnels, through more mountains, near more towns. If the tunnel boom had remained unsolved, the railway would have been pinned in place. It could not have safely raised its speeds, and every new line bored through the mountains would have come preloaded with a noise problem that violated the nation's own laws. While Japan stalled, the rest of the world would not have waited. France was pushing the TGV ever faster, and other nations were eyeing the high-speed crown. The boom was not a cosmetic annoyance. It was a genuine ceiling on the speed and the growth of the single most important transport network in the country, and a bird lifted that ceiling. But there is a quieter, more bittersweet ending to the story of the 500 itself, and it is the kind of irony this kind of history is full of. That specific train, the gorgeous one with the 15-meter beak, was extraordinarily expensive to build. Only 9 of them were ever made. And within a couple of decades, the relentless march of newer, cheaper, more practical designs pushed the beautiful, costly 500 out of frontline service, relegating it from the glamorous high-speed runs to more modest duties. The icon itself had a surprisingly short reign at the very top, and yet its real legacy is not in those 9 trains. It is in every single bullet train that came after it. Because once the Kingfisher had shown the way, that long, streamlined, beak-like nose became the template for high-speed rail across Japan and far beyond. The 500 may have faded, but its borrowed beak never did. It quietly reshaped the front of every fast train in the world. Which brings us all the way back to where we started. The most advanced machine of its age, the pride of a technological superpower, was perfected not by outthinking nature, but by humbling itself before it, and copying a shape that a small blue bird had been carrying over Japanese rivers since long before there were any engineers at all. The supercomputers were right. But the Kingfisher got there first, by 50 million years. And the next time you see a bullet train, with that strange, beautiful, elongated nose knifing towards you, remember that you are not just looking at engineering. You are looking at a bird, scaled up to the size of a building, and taught to fly down a tunnel. And yet, for all its elegance, Japan's quiet, efficient bird train was about to face a challenge that would make even 300 kilometers an hour look slow. Because while Japan was perfecting the art of the wheel on the rail, another country was preparing to throw the rail away entirely. A machine that does not roll, but floats, held a fraction of an inch above the track by nothing but magnetic force, and built to scream across the landscape at 600 kilometers an hour. China had been watching the world's high-speed leaders very closely, and it was about to take this very idea, the obsession with cutting through the air, and push it to a limit that physics itself starts to fight back against. How they built a train that flies without leaving the ground and what it costs to chase that number is where we're going next.